is Louise, but everyone calls me Lou. From the outside, it probably looks like I have the most glamorous life. I come from a rich family. I go to a prominent private college in New York, and I live in a mansion called Plutus Heights with my group of friends. Sounds pretty epic, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to live with a bunch of rich kids? Well, just wait. So many unexpected things were about to happen to me, including my current dreamy boyfriend. And it all started the day I moved into Plutus Heights. Before I dive into all the crazy stuff that happened to me, let me tell you a bit more about myself. My parents run a super successful restaurant chain. From fast food joints to fine dining, they cover it all. Because of this, I've always been interested in the food industry, so that's why I chose to study economics and food industry management. However, there was just one small problem. I was still living at home with my parents, and I have a 5-year-old little brother, so it was pretty distracting. All my friends were living in their own fancy loft apartments, and I wanted that independent life too. Well, lucky for me, it was just around the corner. One day, my dad invited a business friend he'd met earlier that year over for dinner. He was big in the tech world, and my dad loved these kinds of networking dinners. This guy brought his family, and that's when I met Aaliyah. She was the same age as me, and we had so much in common. In fact, she even studied at the same college as me. The best part was that when my dad mentioned that he was looking for a place for me to start living independently, Aaliyah suddenly said, "Lou, oh my god, you should totally move into the mansion I live in." This was what I wanted. I was so scared my parents would say no, but actually, they were totally on board. I think they realized it was time I had my own space. Finally, the day came to move into Plutus Heights. I couldn't believe it when we pulled up outside it. It looked like a palace. Honestly, it was like something out of a European fairy tale. There were pillars and even 2 white lions by the front door. It was crazy. I seriously expected a butler to appear. Aaliyah was waiting by the door for me and gave me the grand tour. I think my jaw almost hit the marble floor. Who would have thought that this mansion was for students to live? The entire interior of this mansion was very luxurious and splendid, but the more she showed me, the more I started to feel uncomfortable. These fancy things just didn't fit me. I wasn't into showing off at all, but it seemed like this palace was built for that reason. But what could I do? I was already there, so I guess I just have to get used to it. As Aaliyah showed me around, she told me about the other students who lived there. Jeremy, Will, and Mark were the 3 guys who owned the place. Well, their parents owned it, but technically it was theirs now. They were all best friends, and Jeremy's girlfriend Naomi also lived there. But Naomi had been uncomfortable with being the only girl, so she'd asked Aaliyah to move in too. Aaliyah's family weren't exactly over the moon about her living with 3 boys and a couple, so they felt much better now knowing that I was going to be living there too. Weirdly enough, my parents were fine about the fact I'd be living with 3 boys. And after a few days living here, I realized that it was totally fine too, because I barely had any contact with the others. It was only after a few months when they threw a welcome party for a newbie called David that I really got to know them. David was Mark's cousin and had just enrolled at our college, majoring in business management. Aaliyah told me that David was quite an extravagant person and came from a seriously rich family. So he thought the first must-do thing was throwing a welcome party for him. I almost laughed. He must be very famous, or really desired to be famous. But to be honest, I'd have hated flashy parties anyway. The party was held on the lawn of the mansion, and Aaliyah had warned me to dress accordingly. And when Aaliyah saw me wearing jeans and a blouse, she immediately dragged me to her room and lent me the most flashy dress I've ever seen. I felt so ridiculous in it. Yes, I was born into the US elite, but it just wasn't my style to wear fancy clothes and show off like this. As soon as we went down to the party, Jeremy, Will, and Mark were already surrounded by a group of girls. Typical, right? What else do you expect from rich, handsome guys? Jeremy is African American and is pretty much John Legend's twin. He barely turned up to class and instead spent most of his time out singing. Actually, he was already pretty famous, and Aaliyah told me he was worth millions already. He was a total babe magnet, and all the girls were swarming around him. Honestly, he was such an attention seeker. I basically rolled my eyes when I saw him. Then there was Mark. At first, I'd been excited to meet him because his family ran an investment company and he was the head of the college's investment club, where he taught people how to invest their money, family money, wink wink, to make smart investment decisions. I immediately joined the club, but I quickly regretted it. Mark was so strict. He made us investigate various companies' financial situations and report back to him. Then, if we got something wrong, he'd call us out in front of everyone. It was humiliating. Loads of people dropped out of the club, and I almost did too. Okay, and I can't forget Will. He was studying engineering, and he always said good morning to me and smiled at me. Seemed to be the most gentle guy here. Out of the 3 guys, he was the only one who really greeted me, and yet that's as far as it went. For some reason, he kept his distance. He smiled, but it felt cold somehow. I figured it was because he basically came from a royal family, and that kindly expression was just glued to their face. You know, to dangerously hide something inside them. Anytime I approached him, he would just smile, then walk away. And it wasn't just me. He showed no interest in any of the girls at the party either. But anyway, that's enough about the boys. The party was now in full swing, and I was standing there all by myself, feeling awkward. I had to find someone to talk to, but Aaliyah was too busy with her friends. Just at that moment, Naomi arrived in the most ridiculous haute couture dress. Oh, I haven't told you about Naomi yet. Okay, so she is basically a celeb. Her whole family are celebs, and she's been a model since she was 15. Unlike her boyfriend Jeremy, she was quite hard to approach. She was really sassy and didn't have much time for anyone, unless they were a celeb too. As soon as Jeremy saw Naomi, he pushed all the other girls away and headed towards her for a kiss. The party was already driving me crazy, and it had just started. I was about to go back to my room when I spotted David sitting alone under a tree on the lawn. I plucked up the courage to go chat to him and asked if he was okay. He said,
"What do you think? This is meant to be my party. But just look around. I might as well be invisible."
Then he told me that since college, everything had gone downhill. He was no longer the popular guy he'd once been. I was about to sit down next to him and comfort him when all of a sudden, something smashed. I quickly turned around, and there were 2 girls standing there with shards of a porcelain statue around their feet. The whole party had gone silent, and everyone was just staring in shock. One of the girls came right up to David and yelled out, "You think it's okay to just dump my friend by text and then move right on to the next girl?" David just grinned and said,
"She just couldn't satisfy me anymore."
Then the friend of his ex shouted, "Oh boy, you couldn't afford her. What are you expecting?" At that, David went bright red and shouted, "There's nothing I can't afford." I guessed that the girl's comment hurt David's pride because he looked so hurt and angry and started rushing towards her, so I quickly jumped in between them to hold him back. Suddenly, David grabbed my hand and said,
"At least I'm with a more mature girl now. Someone who actually deserves me."
I was so embarrassed. Everyone was watching, and I hated being in the spotlight like this. I didn't know what else to do, so I just played along and kept on holding his hand. The girls both looked so shocked and started walking away, but David quickly called out to them,
"Oh, by the way, girls, that statue you just smashed, it cost $2 million. You can split the bill. Thanks."
They both just froze and watched as David kissed me on the cheek and pulled me away. I could feel their eyes piercing into my back, and I swear I was shaking. I was so nervous. Also, I might have been kind of nervous because this gorgeous boy was holding my hand and not letting go. For the rest of the party, he kept introducing me to everyone as his girlfriend, getting me drinks from the bar, and always making sure I was okay. No one had ever been so sweet to me before. And before the party was up, I thought to myself that David was actually a pretty cool guy. Not at all how I'd expected him to be. Little did I know that the next day, I'd discover another side to him. I woke up to David knocking on my door. As soon as I saw him, my heart started beating faster. "Do you want to come in?" I asked him. Then he just winked and said,
"Duh, Lou. I couldn't wait to see you again. In fact, would you be interested in going on a date with me? I wanted to thank you for the night."
I could feel my face going bright red. Then I looked at him and said, Sure. Why not?" Well, let's just say the date wasn't what I had in mind. First, he took me to the mall. I was so confused. Then I realized he must have been embarrassed by my simple clothes. He said he wanted to treat me to some expensive clothes, which annoyed me. That wasn't my style at all. Why was he trying to change me? Then he took me to a club to meet all his friends, and he kept ordering the most expensive bottles of wine. He was just showing off, and I hated it. Then it got worse when a group of beautiful girls arrived. As soon as he saw them, he left me sitting there all alone and started flirting with them. Aaliyah was right. He was nothing but a playboy, and I'd had enough. So much for a date. I told David I wanted to go home, and he got angry. He said I was a spoilsport, and then laughed, saying I didn't know how to have fun. I was furious, so I said to him, "Why did you even invite me on this date? Just so you could show off and pretend you had a girlfriend?" I didn't even wait for him to reply. I just left and took a taxi home. I could barely sleep that night. I felt so annoyed at myself for almost falling for such an idiot. Then the next morning, things got even worse. I went downstairs and found Mark, Will, and Jeremy talking about David. They said he'd been arrested and put in a jail cell. Apparently, he'd been driving drunk, and when the police stopped him and fined him, he got mad and resisted them. So now he was in jail! Mark just laughed and said it was David's problem and that his parents would bail him out. Even though I was angry at the way David had treated me, I still felt sorry for him. I couldn't believe Mark would be so heartless. David is his cousin after all. I asked him which police station David was at, and then I stormed off to go find him. When I arrived at the station, David looked so happy to see me. He was exhausted and said,
"Oh, Lou, I'm so sorry about last night. I was such an ass. Please forgive me."
I still felt kinda mad at him, but I said, "I forgive you. Come on, let's get you home." He kept thanking me, saying how I was the only one who cared enough about him to come bail him out. He said,
"When I throw a party, all my friends come. When I open expensive wine, all the girls want to be my friend. But when I land up in jail, you're the only one sweet enough to come help me."
I told him that was how friends were supposed to act, and he kept smiling at me. And then something crazy happened. Right outside the police station, David turned to me and said,
"Listen, Lou, I like you. I know I just pretended you were my girlfriend, but I couldn't stop thinking about you in the cell last night. I was wondering, will you be my girlfriend? For real?"
I was shocked. I hadn't expected this at all. I mean, what was I supposed to say? I was speechless. If you want to know how I responded, stay tuned for the next episode. Which of my housemates will I end up spending the rest of my life with? Only time will tell.